Duke Cassian Hawthorne returned to Hawthorne Hall, expecting the doors to open before his carriage stopped. They always had. For 12 years, the great house had responded to him like a trained animal. Footmen hurried when his wheels touched gravel. Maids lowered their eyes before he stepped into the hall. The butler appeared with gloves ready, the housekeeper with instructions already obeyed, the groom with horses prepared before orders were spoken. Cassian liked that. He liked houses that remembered power. He liked servants who understood rank. He liked wives who did not ask questions when husbands returned from London with perfume clinging to their coats and excuses polished thin. So when his black carriage rolled beneath the stone archway of Hawthorne Hall at the end of the summer season, he sat back with lazy confidence. Beside him, Lady Rosaline Morel adjusted the lace at her sleeve and smiled at the manor through the window. "It is colder than London," she said. "Hawthorne has always been severe," Cassian replied. She laughed softly. "And your Duchess?" He looked toward the entrance steps. "Seraphine knows her duty." Rosaline's mouth curved. "And if she objects to my staying?" "She will not." He said it easily. Too easily. Duchess Seraphine Hawthorne had never been dramatic. That was one of the reasons he had married her. She had come with a fine dowry, a quiet temperament, and a mother's estate that had rescued Hawthorne from debts his father had carefully disguised as tradition. Seraphine did not shout. She did not embarrass him. She did not follow him to London when he told her the season would exhaust her. She simply stayed at Hawthorne Hall, waiting. At least, that was what Cassian believed. The carriage stopped. No footman came. Cassian frowned. Outside, the front steps stood empty. The house itself seemed to watch him. Tall windows reflected the grey sky. Ivy climbed one side of the old stone walls. The great doors remained closed. Rosaline glanced at him. "Is no one coming?" Cassian's jaw tightened. He struck the carriage roof with his cane. Still nothing. The groom finally opened the door, but even he did it slowly, almost reluctantly. Cassian stepped down first. Then he offered his hand to Rosaline. She descended in pale yellow silk, young, beautiful, and entirely aware that every curtain in the house had shifted. Somewhere behind those windows, servants were watching. But none came to bow. Cassian's irritation sharpened. He climbed the steps and lifted his cane toward the door. Before he could strike, the doors opened. Mr. Alden, the butler, stood inside. He was 60, dignified, and usually so precise that Cassian sometimes wondered whether the man breathed on schedule. Yet today he did not bow deeply. He inclined his head. "Your Grace." Cassian entered slowly. "You kept me waiting." "Yes, Your Grace." The answer was wrong, not apologetic, not frightened, simply true. Cassian stared at him. "Have Lady Rosaline's trunks taken to the Gold Suite?" Mr. Alden did not move. "The Gold Suite is unavailable." Rosaline's brows lifted. Cassian's voice lowered. "Unavailable?" "Yes, Your Grace." "To whom?" "To Her Grace's guests." The silence in the entrance hall became sharp. Cassian looked around properly for the first time. The servants were there after all, not lined up in welcome, lined up along the walls. Footmen, maids, kitchen girls, grooms, the housekeeper, the scullery boy with flour still on one sleeve. Even old Mrs. Bell from the laundry stood near the corridor, her hands folded before her. They were not smiling. They were not trembling. They were waiting. Cassian's stomach tightened in a way he did not understand. Then Duchess Seraphine appeared at the top of the staircase. She wore deep green silk, plain except for a single emerald comb in her dark hair. No diamonds, no lace meant to impress, no wounded wife costume meant to draw pity. Her face was calm, but not empty. That unsettled him most. A neglected woman should have looked broken. Seraphine looked prepared. "Welcome home, Cassian," she said. Her voice carried down the marble staircase. Rosaline looked up and gave a pretty curtsy. "Your Grace." Seraphine's eyes moved to her. "Just once." Lady Rosaline. No warmth, no rage. Somehow that was worse. Cassian removed his gloves with deliberate slowness. You have failed to receive my guest properly. Seraphine descended the stairs. The servants watched her the way soldiers watched a commander before a battle. Cassian noticed. He did not like it. My apologies, Seraphine said. I was uncertain which proper form applies when a husband brings home his mistress with enough trunks to invade a small country. A maid near the wall choked softly, then lowered her head. Rosaline flushed. Cassian's eyes hardened. You will not insult her. Seraphine reached the bottom step. Then perhaps you should not have brought her here as an insult to me. The hall went silent. For 12 years, she had never spoken to him like that before. Cassian stepped closer. We will discuss this in private. No. The word struck him harder than it should have. He stared. No? No. Seraphine repeated. You made your season public. You brought her home in public. You expected the household to assist your cruelty in public. We shall not hide the consequences in private, merely because you have discovered they are uncomfortable. Rosaline's voice trembled with irritation. I came here under His Grace's protection. Seraphine looked at her. That must be frightening. Rosaline blinked. It should be, Seraphine added. Cassian's patience snapped. Enough. Mr. Alden, escort Lady Rosaline to the gold suite. The butler remained still. Cassian turned slowly. I gave you an order. Mr. Alden's face did not change. I heard it, Your Grace. And I cannot obey it. A low gasp moved through the lower servants. Rosaline stepped back. Cassian stared at the old butler as if he had transformed into a stranger. You cannot? No, Your Grace. Have you forgotten who pays your wages? For the first time, Seraphine smiled. It was not kind. No, Cassian. That is exactly what they remember. He turned toward her. She lifted one hand slightly. Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper, stepped forward and placed a leather ledger into Seraphine's hands. Cassian looked from the ledger to the servants. Something cold moved inside him. What is this? Seraphine opened the book. 6 months of unpaid wages. His face changed. Only slightly. But she saw it. The West Farms unpaid for winter grain, she continued. The kitchen accounts delayed. 3 maids dismissed without references by your steward. 2 grooms injured and denied compensation. The laundry women told to accept half pay until your London expenses settled. Shall I continue? Rosaline looked at Cassian sharply. You said the estate was stable. It is, he snapped. Seraphine closed the ledger. No, it was silent. You mistook that for stability. The servants remained motionless. But the air around them changed. These were not nameless figures holding trays and opening doors. They were people with memories, grievances, and now, apparently, courage. Cassian turned on Mr. Alden. You discussed estate accounts with Her Grace. Mr. Alden's voice remained calm. Her Grace asked why the staff were hungry. The words landed like a blow. Rosaline's face paled. Cassian felt heat rise in his own. I left instructions with Steward Vale. And Steward Vale obeyed them, Seraphine said, until I dismissed him. For a moment, Cassian could not speak. You dismissed my steward, our steward, and yes, you had no authority. On the contrary, while you were in London, I found I had far more authority than you wished me to remember. She nodded again. Mr. Alden opened the drawing-room doors. Inside stood 3 men Cassian recognized at once. Mr. Calloway, the family solicitor, Lord Emerson, the county magistrate, and Sir Julian Merworth, the Queen's household observer. Cassian's mouth went dry. Rosaline whispered, Cassian? Seraphine stepped aside. Come in, Your Grace. You have been away all season. The house has changed in your absence. He did not move. For the first time since inheriting Hawthorne Hall, Cassian felt the ground beneath it shift. What have you done? He asked. Seraphine's eyes did not leave his. What you never imagined I would do. She turned toward the servants. Every head lifted. I listened. The word seemed simple. It was not. It filled the hall like a verdict. Cassian looked at the faces around him. Mrs. Bell from the laundry, Thomas the footman, young Alice from the kitchens, old Alden, Hargrove, the grooms, the maids, even the scullery boy. They did not look like staff awaiting orders. They looked like witnesses. And that was when Cassian understood something was deeply wrong. His wife had not merely endured his absence, she had used it. She had walked through the house he thought belonged to him and heard every truth hidden beneath polished silver and closed doors. She had followed the accounts, she had found the missing wages, she had dismissed his steward, she had invited officials. And somehow, impossibly, she had changed the loyalty of the servants. Cassian forced a laugh. It sounded thin. You think a few servants can stand against a duke? Seraphine looked at him with quiet sadness. No, Cassian. Then she opened the ledger again. I think the truth can. Before he could answer, a carriage bell rang outside. Then another, then several more. Rosaline turned toward the entrance doors in alarm. Mr. Alden stepped forward. Her Grace's guests have arrived. Cassian stared at Seraphine. Guests? Yes, she said. The first carriage stopped before the steps, then the second, then the third. Through the open doors, Cassian saw crests he recognized from court, families he had laughed with in London, men who had watched him parade Rosaline at dinners while his wife remained in the country. Seraphine handed the ledger to Mr. Calloway. You brought your mistress home after a season of making me into a whisper, she said quietly. So I invited every whisper back to hear the answer. Cassian looked at the servants again. None lowered their eyes. Not one. And for the first time in his life, Duke Cassian Hawthorne entered his own drawing room as a man who no longer knew whether anyone inside his house would obey him. The drawing room had never looked more beautiful. That was the cruelest part. Sunlight poured through tall windows onto polished floors. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases. Silver trays of tea and cakes had been arranged with perfect precision. Every chair had been placed to appear casual, though Cassian knew enough about aristocratic gatherings to recognize strategy when he saw it. The important guests sat closest to the fireplace. The witnesses stood near the walls. The servants waited by the doors. His wife stood at the center of it all. Seraphine had turned his house into a courtroom without ever calling it one. Cassian entered with Rosaline at his side, though he noticed she no longer stood quite so close to him. Her earlier confidence had cracked. The pale yellow silk that had seemed charming in the carriage now looked too bright beneath the room's judgment. The Countess of Arlen watched from a blue armchair. Lord Marchvale stood near the mantel. Lady Verity, the Queen's cousin, sat beside Sir Julian Merworth with a fan closed in her lap. A closed fan was never a good sign. It meant the woman had no need to hide her expression. She wanted him to see it. Cassian bowed stiffly. This is an unexpected honour. Lady Verity replied, Your wife's invitation was unusually compelling. Rosaline tried to smile. How lovely that everyone could gather. No one answered her. Seraphine moved to the writing table. Thank you all for coming. I regret the unusual nature of this gathering, but Hawthorne Hall has suffered for too long under the protection of silence. Cassian laughed softly. Dramatic words for household misunderstandings. Mrs. Hargrove looked up. Only for a second, but Cassian saw it. So did the court. Seraphine did not argue with him. She turned to the housekeeper. Mrs. Hargrove, when did the wages first begin arriving late? The housekeeper stepped forward. Her hands were steady. 2 years ago, Your Grace. At first only a week, then a month. By last winter, 3 months for some of the lower staff. Cassian's jaw tightened. Estate income fluctuates. Seraphine nodded. Yes, that was Steward Vale's explanation as well. She lifted another ledger. Until I found the London accounts. Cassian's eyes narrowed. Rosaline's fingers gripped the back of a chair. Mr. Calloway took the ledger and began reading. Dressmaker bills, opera boxes, gaming club debts, jewels purchased from a Bond Street merchant, a townhouse rented under an assumed name, carriage expenses, private supper accounts, and finally payments made directly to Lady Rosaline Mirel. A murmur moved through the room. Rosaline stood. Those were gifts. Seraphine looked at her. Yes, they were. The simplicity of the answer disarmed her. Seraphine continued. Gifts bought while the kitchen maids were told to share winter boots. Gifts bought while the west roof leaked over the nursery wing. Gifts bought while Thomas Reed was dismissed for refusing to work unpaid. Thomas, the former footman, stepped forward from the far side of the room. Cassian had not even noticed him. He remembered the man vaguely, tall, quiet, useful. One of those servants who appeared when summoned and disappeared when not needed. That was how Cassian preferred servants, present without becoming real. Now Thomas stood before the court in a clean but worn coat, his face pale but determined. Seraphine turned to him gently. Tell them what happened. Thomas swallowed. I asked Steward Vale when the wages would come. My mother was ill, and I needed to pay the apothecary. He told me His Grace had greater expenses than servant troubles. When I said I could not continue without pay, he dismissed me without reference. Lady Verity's expression hardened. Cassian looked away. He had never said those words, but he had created the man who could. Seraphine continued. And your mother? Thomas's mouth tightened. Her Grace paid the apothecary. Every servant in the room knew that already. The court did not. A murmur of approval moved quietly through the guests. Cassian turned on his wife. You spent estate funds without consulting me? No, Seraphine said. I used my pin money, since my husband was using estate funds for opera suppers. The blow landed. A few guests looked down. Rosaline's face burned. Mr. Calloway presented the next document. Her Grace then began a review of all household accounts. Steward Vale attempted to prevent access to the wage ledgers. He claimed only His Grace could authorize review. He was correct, Cassian said. No, Calloway replied. He was not. The solicitor opened a copy of the marriage settlement. Cassian went still. He had never read the thing closely. His father's lawyers had handled it. Seraphine's mother's lawyers had insisted on several clauses. Cassian had signed because he wanted the dowry, the alliance, and the wedding done before creditors asked questions. Calloway read calmly. In the event of the Duke's extended absence from the principal estate, the Duchess retains authority over household management, wage distribution, staff protections, and internal discipline, especially where negligence threatens the welfare of dependents. Lady Verity's brows lifted. The Countess of Arlen whispered, Excellent clause. Seraphine's mouth curved faintly. My mother was an excellent woman. Cassian looked at her. For the first time, he wondered how much of his comfort had been built on things he never understood. Rosaline stepped forward. This may all be regrettable, but surely it has nothing to do with me. Mrs. Bell from the laundry made a small sound. Seraphine looked toward her. Mrs. Bell? The old laundry woman stepped forward with visible effort. Her hands were rough from years of boiling water and soap. Cassian had passed her 100 times and never once asked her name. Now he would never forget it. The lady sent word ahead, Mrs. Bell said. Rosaline went white. Cassian turned. What word? Mrs. Bell took a folded note from her apron. Seraphine did not touch it. Mr. Calloway did. He read aloud. The West maids should be removed before my arrival. I dislike sullen faces and old servants too loyal to the Duchess. His Grace will approve the changes once I am settled. The room went ice cold. Rosaline's lips parted. That is private correspondence. Lady Verity spoke sharply. It is a private cruelty, not a private innocence. Rosaline looked at Cassian. I only meant the household would be uncomfortable with me here. Seraphine's voice became quiet. So you plan to remove the discomfort? Rosaline said nothing. Seraphine nodded to the maid nearest the door. Alice, the kitchen girl, stepped forward next. She looked barely 17, her cap trembling slightly as she held herself straight. Cassian felt irritation rise at first. Why was a child being allowed to speak before court guests? Then he saw Seraphine's face and stopped himself. Alice lifted her eyes. Steward Vale told us Lady Rosaline would become mistress of the household once His Grace returned. He said her grace had accepted it because she had no children and no power. He said any servant who preferred the Duchess would be dismissed after Michaelmas. Cassian felt the room turn toward him. He had said nothing of the kind. But again, he had allowed people to believe enough. Rosaline whispered, "Vale exaggerated." Seraphine looked at her. Did he? The door opened. 2 footmen brought in Steward Vale. He had clearly not expected the size of the audience. His face drained the moment he saw the magistrate. Cassian's fury found an easier target. "Vale, what is this nonsense?" Vale swallowed. "Your Grace, I only acted in the estate's interest." "The estate's interest," Seraphine repeated. She placed a third ledger on the table. "This contains missing wages, falsified repair costs, dismissed staff records, and correspondence between you, Lady Rosaline, and Lord Penrith." Cassian frowned. "Lord Penrith?" Rosaline closed her eyes. There it was. The part she had feared most. Seraphine watched her closely. "Lord Penrith is Lady Rosaline's uncle," she said. "He holds several of your London debts." Cassian felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What?" Rosaline turned toward him. "Cassian," but Seraphine continued. "During the season, Lord Penrith extended credit to you through private notes. In exchange, he expected influence over Hawthorne estate appointments, beginning with the removal of senior servants loyal to me and the installation of Vale's chosen replacements." Vale began sweating. Lord Marchvale stepped forward. "Why would he care about household appointments?" Seraphine answered. "Because household loyalty controls household information." The room fell silent. "And Hawthorne Hall," she continued, "contains information Lord Penrith badly wants hidden." Cassian stared at her. He no longer cared about Rosaline's embarrassment. He no longer cared about the court's whispers. Some deeper instinct told him this was not merely about an affair. This was about the estate itself. Seraphine turned toward Mr. Alden. The butler stepped forward, carrying a locked metal box. Cassian recognized it. His father's travelling strongbox. He had not seen it since the old Duke died. "Where did you find that?" he demanded. "In the servants' archive," Seraphine said. "There is no servants' archive." Mr. Alden looked at him calmly. "There has always been one, Your Grace." The words unsettled the room. Seraphine touched the strongbox. "Every great house keeps 2 histories. One in portraits and family papers, another in kitchens, laundry rooms, ledgers, letters and memories. Your father understood that, so did the servants who survived him." Cassian's mouth went dry. "Survived him?" Mrs. Hargrove lowered her eyes. Mr. Alden opened the box. Inside were old letters, wage books, witness statements, and a sealed paper bearing the mark of the late Duchess Hawthorne, Cassian's mother. His mother had died when he was young. He remembered white hands, lavender scent, a voice from behind curtains. His father had always said, grief weakened her. Illness took her. Servants were not to speak of it. Seraphine lifted the sealed paper. "This was hidden by your mother's maid." Cassian could barely breathe. "What is it?" Seraphine's expression softened, but only for a moment. "A confession." The room disappeared around him. Cassian heard his own voice, as if from far away. "Whose?" Seraphine looked at the servants before answering. "Your father's." Vale lunged suddenly for the door. Thomas and another footman caught him before he reached it. The magistrate rose. Rosaline covered her mouth. Cassian stared at the strongbox. Seraphine broke the seal, and in front of the court, the servants, his mistress, and the ghosts of Hawthorne Hall, she began to read the truth his entire life had been built to hide. The loyalty he had to earn. The confession did not begin with murder, madness, or anything dramatic enough to excuse the silence that followed. It began with money. That made it worse. The late Duke Hawthorne had borrowed heavily against lands he did not fully own. He had hidden debts behind household accounts, delayed wages, dismissed anyone who questioned him, and used fear to keep the estate obedient. When servants threatened to speak, he ruined their references. When tenants complained, He raised rents. When his wife objected, he called her fragile. Cassian listened as Seraphine read in the quiet room. His father's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, controlled, cruel in its neatness. The confession had been written during the old Duke's final illness, but never delivered. It admitted that several properties believed to belong to the Hawthorne line had in fact been purchased with the dowry of Cassian's mother. Her will had required that certain funds be placed into a protection trust for household dependents, pensions for long-serving staff, medical care for injured workers, education for servant children, and safeguards against dismissal without wages or references. The old Duke had suppressed it. For 23 years. Cassian felt sick. Seraphine continued reading until her voice reached the last page. If my son becomes the man I made him, let the servants remember what I tried to erase. Let the Duchess who comes after me find this, if she has the courage to listen where no one else listens. The words settled over the room. No one moved. Cassian's throat tightened. The father he had feared and admired had built Hawthorne power on theft from the very people polishing its silver. And Cassian, without knowing the full truth, had continued the pattern. Late wages, dismissed servants, a steward using fear in his name, a mistress writing ahead to remove loyal faces. He wanted to say he had not known, but ignorance suddenly felt less like innocence and more like laziness dressed in silk. Lord Emerson, the magistrate, took the confession from Seraphine and examined the seal. Sir Julian Merriworth reviewed the attached will. Mr. Calloway produced copies of bank records Seraphine had already gathered. Of course she had. She had spent the season building a case, while he spent it being admired by a woman whose uncle wanted his debts to swallow the house. Rosaline stood trembling near the window. "Cassian," she whispered, "I did not know about your father." He looked at her. For months, he had thought her charming because she never asked him to become better. Now he understood that some women feel easy to love only because they require nothing honorable from a man. "But you knew about the servants," he said. She looked away. The answer was enough. Vale broke first. The steward began speaking quickly, naming Lord Penrith, listing letters, payments, instructions. He had been told to keep wages delayed, so the staff would become desperate. He had been told to dismiss anyone close to Seraphine before Cassian returned. He had been told that once Rosaline was settled in the house, the Duchess could be pressured into leaving for the dower estate. Rosaline wept. No one comforted her. Not yet. Some tears ask for mercy. Others arrive only when exposure becomes unavoidable. Cassian turned to Seraphine. "You knew all of this before I came home." "Not all," she said. "Enough." "And you told the servants." "I asked them." He frowned. She continued, "That is the difference you still do not understand. Your father commanded silence. You inherited command. I asked questions." Mrs. Bell's eyes filled. Thomas looked down. Alice held her hands together tightly, as if afraid to hope. Seraphine lifted the final document from the strongbox. "This is the late Duchess's trust." Mr. Calloway stepped forward. "It is valid," he said. "Suppressed, but valid. With the magistrate's witness and royal observation, it can be restored." Lord Emerson nodded. "The estate will be required to answer for unpaid protections." Cassian looked around the room. All his life, Hawthorne Hall had seemed invincible because everyone obeyed. Now he saw the truth. The house had been held together by people who had every reason to abandon it. And Seraphine had given them a reason not to. Not loyalty to him. Loyalty to justice. Lady Verity spoke for the first time in nearly half an hour. "Duchess, what are you asking?" Seraphine did not hesitate. Immediate removal of Steward Vale. Full payment of wages owed, restoration of dismissed servants with references and compensation, establishment of the Hawthorne Household Trust according to the late Duchess's will, legal protection against dismissal without cause, review of estate debts tied to Lord Penrith, and formal recognition that household staff may testify without retaliation. Cassian stared at her. This was not a wife's revenge thrown in anger. This was reform. Prepared, lawful, unignorable. And the Duke? Lord Marchvale asked. Every eye turned to Cassian. Seraphine looked at him for a long moment. He may decide who he wishes to be after hearing the truth. That answer wounded him more than any punishment, because she did not beg him to change. She did not threaten him. She simply left him standing before the man he had been. Cassian looked toward Mr. Alden. The old butler met his gaze. For the first time, Cassian wondered what Alden had seen when he looked at him all these years. A boy shaped by his father, a man repeating old cruelties, a duke too proud to notice hunger under his own roof. Mr. Alden, Cassian said. The butler straightened. Cassian's voice caught, but he forced the words through. I owe you wages. Alden's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Yes, Your Grace. And an apology. The room went still. Cassian turned to Mrs. Hargrove. To you as well. Then to Thomas. And you. Then to Alice. And you. His eyes moved over the servants, one by one. I cannot undo what my father did. I cannot undo what I allowed by refusing to see. But I can stop pretending rank excuses blindness. No one applauded. He did not deserve applause. That was why the silence felt honest. That was why the silence felt honest. Cassian faced Lord Emerson. Steward Vale is dismissed and placed under your authority for investigation. The trust is to be restored. All wages owed are to be paid from my personal accounts, not estate funds. If my London holdings must be sold, sell them. Rosaline made a small sound. He turned to her. Lady Rosaline, you will leave Hawthorne Hall before nightfall. Her face crumpled. Cassian. No. It was the first clean word he had spoken all day. No more rooms prepared by unpaid maids. No more jewels bought with delayed wages. No more comfort built on other people's silence. She began crying harder. Where am I to go? Seraphine answered before Cassian could. To your aunt in Bath. Lady Verity has already arranged the carriage. Rosaline looked at the Duchess in stunned humiliation. You would help me? Seraphine's expression remained cool. I am not helping you. I am preventing further disorder in my house. Lady Verity's mouth twitched. Rosaline lowered her eyes. By evening, Hawthorne Hall had changed again. Vale was taken away under guard. Letters were sealed for London. The servants' trust documents were copied and witnessed. Lord Penrith's debts were frozen pending review. Lady Rosaline's trunks were loaded back into the carriage she had arrived in only hours earlier. She left without farewell. No one watched from the steps except Cassian. Not because he loved her, because he needed to see the consequence of what he had invited into his home. When the carriage disappeared, he turned back toward the hall. The servants were not lined up now. They were working, quietly, steadily. Not for him, for the house, for Seraphine, for themselves. That realization humbled him more deeply than public disgrace. Later that night, he found Seraphine in the old servants' archive. He had not known the room existed that morning. It lay beyond the lower corridor near the linen stores, a small stone chamber filled with ledgers, old trunks, letters, wage rolls, household keys, birth records, funeral notices, recipes, and lists of servants who had lived and died within Hawthorne walls. The hidden memory of the house. Seraphine stood at a table, carefully placing his mother's confession into a protective folder. Cassian stopped at the doorway. May I enter? She looked up. The question mattered. Yes. He came inside slowly, like a stranger in a chapel. I thought loyalty meant obedience, he said. Seraphine closed the folder. Most men in great houses do. And you? I think loyalty means people trust you enough to remain when leaving would be easier. He looked at the shelves, at the names written in old ink. They trust you. Yes. Not boastful, not apologetic. True. He nodded. Good. That surprised her. He saw it. I wanted them to choose me, he said. Even after everything. Some childish part of me expected it. But they should not. Not yet. Seraphine studied him. "And what will you do with that understanding?" "Begin where I should have begun." "With apologies?" "With wages." For the first time that day, something softened near her mouth. Not forgiveness, not affection, but recognition. A beginning, perhaps. The weeks that followed were not gentle. Hawthorne Hall did not heal simply because a duke had been embarrassed. Servants who had been mistreated did not forget because money arrived. Thomas returned with his mother, but he refused the footman's position at first. Alice cried when given proper pay, and then became angry that gratitude had been expected for what was owed. Mrs. Bell accepted her pension with dignity, so sharp it cut every noble guest who witnessed it. Cassian learned to stand in rooms where no one rushed to comfort him. He attended wage meetings, he read ledgers, he discovered names, he visited the laundry, the kitchens, the stables, the tenant cottages, the old west wing where maids slept two to a room, because no duke before him had cared about the damp. Everywhere he went he found evidence that Hawthorne Hall had survived not because of ducal greatness, but because ordinary people had held it upright with blistered hands and unpaid patience. Seraphine did not guide him gently. She corrected him sharply. Often, he accepted it. Slowly, the staff stopped stiffening when he entered, not because they forgot, but because he no longer entered like a man expecting the world to bend. Winter came. The household trust was formally restored in the county court. The story spread through society, as all scandal does. At first, people laughed at the duke whose servants had turned against him. Then the laughter shifted. Other houses began reviewing wage books. Other maids began asking questions. Other duchesses began listening. At the Queen's winter reception, Lady Verity raised a toast that made half the court uncomfortable. To the servants who remember what families forget, Seraphine lifted her glass. Cassian did too. From across the room, someone whispered that Duchess Hawthorne had conquered her husband. Seraphine heard and smiled faintly. She had not conquered him. She had simply stopped carrying his blindness. That evening, when they returned to Hawthorne Hall, the doors opened before the carriage stopped. Mr. Alden stood at the entrance. This time, when Cassian stepped down, the butler bowed. Not deeply, not fearfully, respectfully. Cassian understood the difference now. "Mr. Alden," he said, "Your Grace. Is Her Grace's meeting prepared for the morning?" "Yes, Your Grace. The Household Council will gather at 10. The old Cassian would have laughed at the phrase. Household Council. Now he only nodded. Good. Seraphine stepped down beside him. The servants greeted her first. Not because Cassian had fallen, because she had risen in truth. He watched her enter the hall, and for the first time he did not resent their loyalty to her. He admired their wisdom. Years later, people still told the story of the duke who spent a season with his young mistress and came home expecting obedience. They said his wife met him with ledgers. They said the servants refused to bow. They said an old strongbox exposed a buried crime, a mistress was sent away, and a house learned to speak. But the servants told the story differently. They said the Duchess asked their names. They said she paid what was owed. They said she listened before she commanded. And when the Duke finally returned, he found not rebellion, but the truth every great house fears most. Loyalty cannot be inherited. It cannot be purchased with titles. It cannot be forced by bells, wages, uniforms, or fear. It must be earned. And at Hawthorne Hall, the servants had already given theirs to the only person who had treated them as human.